If you're working in TV and film and you've been out of work, you've probably been reading online a saying called survive till 25. Personally, I have been unemployed since April in the film and TV industry. My show wrapped up since then. After I took a brief break because I worked 2 straight years on The Boys, I was looking for new work. And so I sent out my resume to everyone and I was like, when I get back from Scotland, I would love to hit the ground running. This is my resume. Please consider me for any job opportunities. And since then, I've only had 2 interviews. One came because someone was going on maternity leave and they needed someone temporary for 4 months. I interviewed for that. I didn't get that position. And another one, I had an interview and I didn't think the interview went well, but they sent me an email after and they said, hey, we're gonna delay hiring your position till the start of September. If you're still available, then we'd like to reach out and figure something out. This was at the end of July. So naturally I just wrote back, well, just hire me and I'll just continue to relax until then. And then you guys have your post coordinator. And then September came and they never replied back to that email. And I have a friend who works on that show and I checked and they hired another person for that position. So either they weren't really interested in me or I overplayed my hand. Whatever it was, they did not follow up and do what they said they were gonna do. But that's okay. So if you've been looking for work, I personally relate to you. This is the longest I've ever been unemployed since I actually broke in and got onto my first job in Hollywood. I believe my biggest break before was 4 months and now I'm just around 6. Outside of me personally, within my group of contacts, I would say less than 40% of people are actively working in the industry. And many of these people have much more experience than me. I'm around 8 years. Some of these people are around 14 to 20, and they are struggling to find work. This is a great example. I've been reaching out to one of my old post-producers on a show I previously worked on. They've been sending my resume around. They posted on behalf of their friend on one of the private Facebook groups a job opening for my exact position. So I applied to that job. I wrote my old post producer. I was like, hey, could you put me up for it? They told me they had already put me up for it before the job became available and that they would keep me updated. I was hopeful because this was a close friend of theirs and I was like, oh, this is a great in. And then I got a text message from him saying, hey, I don't know if they're even gonna interview you anymore. They got hundreds of applications, including post producers. To give you a reference on how post-production works, there's generally 4 positions. There's post-producer, post-supervisor, post-coordinator, and post-PA. So I'm a post-coordinator. So people that were post-producers were applying to this post-coordinator position. Essentially, they were applying for a job that had a $150,000 pay cut, more or less. And due to that, naturally, most people will not give me an opportunity when they can hire an experienced post-producer to go do a job that a coordinator would do. Imagine this in like basketball terms. Why would you stack your team with rookies when you can go get a LeBron James and pay him on a rookie contract? That one was fairly discouraging for me because I was feeling pretty hopeful. Well, how did we get in this situation? From peak TV to this giant crash that's occurred and now we're back to a level where only 40% of people or so are working in Hollywood? Well, there's multiple factors. Working from the most current, the biggest issue right now is inflation. So as the government pumped in money during COVID to keep the economy alive and to keep people fed and people being paid, naturally inflation was gonna rise. Due to that, the Fed had to increase interest rates. When you increase interest rates, people are naturally going to invest less because borrowing costs more money. This is basic economics. So if you have a 6% interest rate versus a 3% interest rate, that is a substantial difference on the borrowing costs. So companies are gonna take less risks and there's gonna be less productions. This is just a normal thing that happens. So as the interest rate comes down, I expect more borrowing to happen. And I assume productions will kick up, not necessarily to their peak levels or anywhere near it, but they will increase from the position we're currently at. Prior to that, the other issue we're facing is that America is not competitive when it comes to business for TV and film anymore. And that's mostly due to the unions and the taxes. Now, don't attack me if you're a big union person. I am not going anti-union, don't come at me, but I am stating the facts. If you make a production in America where you're dealing with IATSE and you're dealing with the Writers Guild of America and the DGA, you're going to spend a lot more money than if you did that production in a place that didn't have IATSE, the WGA, and the DGA. That's just a fact. I don't think anyone can argue that. It is very expensive to use the unions. Yes, the unions get their members good benefits. Yes, they get them good pay. Yes, it gets them protections. I am not arguing any of that. But the fact is, by using unions, it does cost significantly more to make your movie or your TV show. Productions are just gonna be at a much higher cost. And there's gonna be a lot more limitations on what you can do. Additionally, in America, there aren't competitive tax incentives. So essentially, production used to all be in Los Angeles generally. And then states like New Mexico and Georgia started offering massive tax incentives to pool Hollywood productions to these states. Because it was effective for a time, why not shoot in Georgia or New Mexico and save 30% or 20% of your budget? That is a simple move that could be the difference between making or not making a TV show. However, this also encourages a race toward the bottom. Canada also has many incentives. There's a lot of production in Toronto, there's a lot of production in British Columbia, but now you have South Africa and European nations that are offering even better competitive rates that are lower than Canada, that are lower than New Mexico, lower than Georgia. So as we continue to race to the bottom, companies, these major corporations, are just going to continue to move to where they can save the most money. If you can save 20% in Georgia, why not go to South Africa? Why not go to Europe where you can save potentially 30 to 40%? It's a no-brainer actually to just do this. In addition, when you go shoot over there, you get to avoid the unions, you get to avoid IATSE. If your writers aren't in the WGA, you get to save a tremendous amount of money there with residuals as well. The other factor that really messed everything up was the strikes. So as inflation took off, naturally things became more expensive. And these little pay raises and all these things these studios were doing to chip away at the workers and not pay them fairly, or find ways around the WGA contracts to adequately pay their writers, or Netflix not paying residuals out to anyone when everyone else pays residuals, and these streamers finding ways to not having to pay anybody and just essentially maximizing their profit. These things came to a head. The WGA went on strike, which isn't surprising as they are a union that often will do that. No one doubts that the WGA will immediately go on strike the minute they want to. For better or worse, that's up to you, but the WGA is a union that will go on strike the minute they don't like something. The typical tactics of these studios, however, to combat the WGA strikes is to build up a backlog of scripts so that they can continue into production. The difference this time was that SAG kept saying, hey, we can't keep living. We aren't being paid a lot. You guys need to fix this system. We have to come to some new agreement. And the SAG did not get what they needed, and SAG went on strike. When the actors go on strike, there is nothing else to film. You can't do your ADR. So if we're in post-production like we were with The Boys, I couldn't bring anyone in for ADR sessions. You can't film anything on set. Who are you gonna film with? There's no one in front of the camera. There's no actors anymore. So SAG going on strike essentially shuts everything down unless it's purely in post-production and assuming you don't need any ADR. So a combination of the WGA and SAG basically shut down all production in America. And unless you were an indie movie that got specific approval from SAG, there was essentially no productions going on in America. The shit shut down, it was done. And finally, what I think is the biggest contributor to this giant bubble pop is that we let the tech bros take over Hollywood. So essentially what happened was Netflix came in, they had this really awesome model where you could stream all these television shows, and it worked really well, and it was profitable, and they were the only streamer out there. All the other companies got greedy. They saw how much money you could make. So they all had the genius idea and the tech bro money to launch our own competing streaming services. If Netflix is profitable, we all can be profitable. And this was the biggest mistake they could have made. Nearly no one is profitable in streaming. Everyone is down billions of dollars. And even though it created this boom and multiple jobs, it is not inherently a profitable model. It is like the film industry looked at music streaming and saw how it absolutely decimated that industry. And they said, oh, that's a good idea. We should do that. And then they did, for some inexplicable reason. So instead of continuing their model where they would make a production and then they would put it in theaters and then they could sell it with ads, or they can sell it to Netflix and they can get guaranteed income, they decided that no, we all want a slice of the distribution pie. And because of that, many of the companies are billions of dollars in debt. And because of that, once you become billions of dollars in debt, and when interest rates rise, you have to pay back the debt because it becomes crushing. Sony had tried a little bit of streaming at the beginning of the streaming wars, and they bowed out when they found out it wasn't profitable. But do you know what Sony does now? They just take their movies and their TV shows and they just sell them to Netflix. They sell them to multiple people. They might sell them to Apple TV. They might sell them to Amazon. And guess what? It is a very profitable model. It's almost like that was the proven model we had for years. And the only difference is now that we took it from cable to streaming. Sony, to me, besides Netflix, is the true winner of the streaming wars. They have managed to find a way to stay profitable and not have to deal with the giant infrastructure problems that come along with creating a streaming service. With all that being said, this Monday, I got an email. This Tuesday, I had a phone call interview, and I was offered a job, and I start Thursday. So there's hope.